outside and think about what you see. I'm sure many of you saw either trees, plants, or grass. We interact with countless plants daily, and these plants are there for air quality and are essential for us to breathe. But how many plants that you interact with are actually native to Pennsylvania? Well, according to the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, there are approximately 2,100 native species of plants in Pennsylvania. And a native plant can be defined as a plant that has been in America prior to European colonization. And while non-native plants are most certainly on the rise in Pennsylvania, the truth is that native plants are beneficial to both humans and the environment. I've learned about all these different benefits of native plants from my job where I worked at a greenhouse in Pennsylvania, along with the additional research that I acquired for this presentation. So today I'm going to talk to you about native plants and how they are able to survive stressful conditions, how they attract pollinators, and aid in ecosystem survival. Let's start off by talking about how native plants are successful in growing in stressful conditions. Native plants are able to grow better in stressful conditions compared to non-native species of plants. This makes sense. If a plant is from a certain area, it is established, it is used to variables such as light and water, and it is going to succeed a lot better than a plant that would have to adapt and change. And this can easily be thought of in humans. If I were to say go to Europe, I would have to get used to the culture and the language. But if someone else moved from, say, the south of France to the north of France, they've already been from that area, they're used to the culture and customs, so they're going to have a lot better chance of thriving in their new environment. This is the same for plants. While there's changes of variables, these plants are able to survive better because they're used to that environment, they're used to the different changes in those variables. And according to Curtis C. Daler, a botany professor at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, native plants are more adept to surviving stressful conditions that have low resource availability, such as water, sunlight, and nutrients. And this, again, makes sense. If they're used to those changes, say an area doesn't get a lot of water year after year, that plant is going to be adapted to those changes because it's been there for quite some time compared to a non-native plant that just happened to be planted there. And he also said that native plants are able to survive minor disturbances in their regimes, such as flooding or even fires or mowing. Again, they're more established. They might be used to the flooding that occurs here or there if they live in, say, a floodplain. And this is very important for gardeners because it allows them to succeed better in their gardening skills, and they're not going to have to replant years often if they plant native plants. But native plants are not just important for gardeners, but for pollinators as well. Native plants actually attract pollinators, and pollinators have been on the decline around the world, but they are essential for food production around the world. And according to Deidre Remley, an environmental protection specialist, an estimated 85% of the world's flowering plants rely on pollinators, such as insects. And a pollinator is an insect such as a bee, and they form a relationship. For example, the bee goes to the plant and gets food source of nectar. And while the bee is fed, the plant actually is also benefiting in a symbiotic relationship because the pollen is going to be rubbed off on the bee and then taken to another flower, and that aids in their sexual reproduction. And they also just provide a host for these plants. And a host is also another very important aspect for native plants, as they are able to provide a home for baby insects. So a host plant is basically a plant in which an insect would lay its young, and then the young would hatch and it would eat. And one primary example of a pollinator that has a host plant is the monarch butterfly, which is on the decline. If the host plant was not there, the pollinators would cease to exist. And pollinators are very important because, like I said, they aid in food production. And in fact, the majority of our food actually depends on pollinations, and that's where we get the majority of our vitamins and minerals, and it aids in our health that we have as humans. And in the United States, crop pollination by insects is estimated valued at up to $27 billion. And while native plants are essential for pollinator survival, they are also essential for the success of the ecosystem. And native plants are able to aid in ecosystem survival. And that's because they have a specific niche. And a niche is a role in which the native plant plays in the environment. This could be the food source that I said before. Native plants provide a food source for, say, pollinators. They could also be a food source for animals that native plants can produce fruit. So if they produce fruit, an animal might eat that fruit and depend on it for survival. Another one, like I said, that's really important is a host plant. If they have the host plant, without the host plant, the insects are not going to be able to survive. And this is very, very important, especially, again, going back to the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly relies on a plant called common milkweed. And this is common milkweed, and it is the plant in which a monarch butterfly will constantly lay its eggs and the young will eat. However, there's also a similar plant that blooms at the same time as the milkweed. And if it happened to be in the environment and the milkweed wasn't, the butterfly might lay her eggs on this plant. However, this plant is actually toxic to butterflies. And according to Doug Talame, a professor at the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Delaware, while it is possible for an ecosystem to survive that is composed primarily of non-native species, it will not do as well, and it will lead to a decrease in biodiversity, which will cause dramatic changes in the environment. In conclusion, native plants are an essential aspect of the environment in which we live. They are able to survive stressful conditions, attract pollinators, and aid in ecosystem survival. They are the face of the environment in which we interact with daily. As Lady Bird Johnson so famously quoted, native plants give us a sense of where we are in this great land of ours. I want Texas to look like Texas and Vermont to look like Vermont.